Are you part of a $22 billion market? Stay tuned. Welcome to this week's edition of Note School TV. Well, where every Wednesday at 11:05 Central Time, we bring you the most amazing content as well as the most amazing guests. So today it is a combination of two. We have both amazing content and two amazing guests who are two of the smartest people that I know in the note space. Tons of experience. But before we bring them on, let's talk about a couple of things here. Number one, make sure and hit that like button. Yeah, go ahead and hit that like button for us. Subscribe if you have not already done so to the Note School TV channel. And number three, make sure and hit boom right now. Hit that bell notification so that you will be notified when we go live. When? Every Wednesday at 11:05 Central Time. Also, please keep those comments coming, questions. Eddie and I love to hear from you, what your perspective is, and just what you're thinking. And also just let us know so we can kind of send this information to our guests as well and let them know that you appreciated what we presented, what they presented on that episode as well. Also, if you would love to hear more about what we do at Note School, simply go to noteschool.com/TV. Again, noteschool.com/TV. And we would really like to have a conversation with you and get you into one of our 2-hour master classes that Eddie and our Chief Market Officer, Max Keller, does for us as well. So we'll talk more about that at the end of the show. But before we bring on our guests, we have a couple of news pieces here real quick would like to go over. So let's go to the news. So today on the news, according to Mortgage Report and the National Association of Realtors, in April, the existing home sales dropped 3.4%. Typically, and that's month over month, typically what you see in the spring is you're going to see a rise in existing home sales, but it has a whole lot to do with inventory. And the median price of a home in the United States, as reported by the National Association of Realtors, is $388,800. And then our second news story today comes to us from Yahoo Finance. U.S. real estate investors are losing money on roughly 1 in 7 homes they sell, among the worst since 2016, and most are likely to take hit in 5 cities. Those 5 cities, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Jacksonville, Sacramento, and Charlotte. So in Phoenix, 30.7% of home sales investors lost money on. And then it's 1 in 7 on investors. And then home flippers, according to Redfin, roughly 1 in 5 sold at a loss in March, which is the latest information that we have. Guys, all of this just leads us to the same place, and now is the time for creative financing to rule the day. So with that, I'm going to bring on our Chief Visionary Officer, founder of Note School, all-around good guy, my friend, Mr. Eddie Speed.
Good morning, Joe.
Good morning. Good morning. We have some amazing guests today, Eddie.
We absolutely have some amazing guests, and they have some amazing information. I am very excited about this. Literally, I was thinking about this all morning in preparation of just excited to be able to do this. So grateful for their willingness to share a lot of hard work. So we're going to get after it, Joe.
Let's get after it. I'm going to drop off, let you introduce our guest, and I'll see you at the back of the show.
All right. So our two guests today, I have the highest level of respect for as people that do business with integrity and people that do this business with an incredible amount of experience and knowledge and clarity. So you guys welcome Fred and Tracy Rewey.
Hey, Eddie.
Hi, Eddie.
Good
Thanks
morning.
for having us back. Good morning.
How are you?
Good. Very good.
Well, I have gotten a glimpse of the report already, and I can tell you that I'm so impressed with this report. And I want to be able to just facilitate you guys telling this great story, but certainly, you got the story, and these slides that you have telling about the production of seller financing and historical information, how it relates to and broken down into asset classes is just an incredible piece of work.
We have a lot of fun doing it every year. It takes a few months after the year closes out to get all the data from the county recorders, but it really gives us an insight of what's happening in the seller finance market. As you know, Eddie, it's one piece of what note investors do. Some create their own notes, some buy existing notes that are seller finance, some work with non-performing debt. But this seller finance market's where I got started in 1988, just a couple of years after you, right?
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating to see how big this market really is and underestimated sometimes. But after people watch your show today, they will not think that any longer.
I think it's a great point. I worked with Fred and Tracy initially. You guys worked with an institutional investor at that time, was the largest in the industry, and you guys were on the executive team there. So I got to do a lot of business with you guys, and we've done a lot of business since then in various ways. But this data report, as Joe said, kind of in his teaser, $22.5 billion in seller financing. And the question is, are you part of this? Fred and Tracy and I are. For sure. And you guys are part of this. So Tracy, I'm going to let you guys pull up the slide, and I'm going to enjoy going through it with you.
Excellent. Well, just hop in anytime you got some questions on something, but we're really going to cover how big is the owner finance market.
Yeah, this is something we've tracked for how many years now?
12?
Yeah, I was gonna say 12 years, and as we go along, it gets better and better. So here's what we're gonna kind of cover today. So we're gonna talk about the key seller financing trends in 2022. Like I said, the reports take a while to compile. So this is just for last year close.
We'll talk about average note amounts and LTVs because people have the tendency to think seller financing is all zeroed down, and we'll bust that myth.
Yep, we're going to actually break it down by property type. So whether we're talking residential, commercial, land.
And what 10 states make up 68% of the value of that volume. So it's kind of like the old 80-20 rule, just a little bit different. But there's 10 states that consistently are top creators of notes.
Yep, and this is something we've been able to narrow in on in the last several years is comparing mom and pop sellers. We look at the person that creates a one-off note and sell it to somebody versus somebody that is in business or creates multiple notes. And we actually have the breakdown for that.
And then we'll talk about what's happening in 2023. Now, before we proceed, I think it's just important to understand what is seller financing. And that's when someone owns a piece of property and they sell it to a buyer, and they allow the buyer to make payments to them instead of going out and getting a bank loan. And so this is what seller financing is. It might be in the form of a note and deed of trust, a note and mortgage, in some states a contract for deed, but most commonly note and deed of trust or note mortgage. So that's what we're talking about here today. So how big is this market? Well, let's look at last year and the prior 5 years.
Yep. So first of all, for last year, it's 22.5 billion. We roughly run between 3 and 5% of all overall sales. So, we talk about a niche industry and you've seen it, but it's a big niche. I mean, it's more notes than we can buy.
Yeah, that's right. And if you look at the last 5 years, this wasn't a one-off fluke. In the last 5 years, when you combine it all together, it's been 123 billion. And that's been running pretty consistent, as we'll see. So, wow, what do you think about that? Now, those are big numbers.
Those are terrifically big numbers. I think it surprises most people.
I think so too.
It surprises me every year I see it, even though I already know about what it's going to be.
Yeah.
So how does that space up against last year? Well, When we look at the dollar volume, that ends up being about 83,647 transactions by count. And I'll be honest, last year was a little bit of a decrease in the count and a decrease in the dollar volume, but that really wasn't surprising based on the decreases we saw overall in inventory on real estate all across the board. And we'll break that down. There's a few states that had the most impact on it.
Yeah. So, what we do is a trailing, 5 years. So basically we're looking at 123 billion. We kind of always keep that last 5 years. So that's the pool of what's available. Now, some of those may have sold, some of them may not be viable, but it's still a really, really, really large number. And also the top 5 states, and Tracy mentioned just a second ago, that decrease is going to come down to just a couple states that kind of move the scale, if you will. But the top 5 producing states for creation of nodes in there, and as far as reports go, is Texas, Florida, California, North Carolina, and Georgia. And a couple of them kind of swap positions every once in a while, but Texas is always the kind of—
You're always number one.
Yeah, you're the 800-pound gorilla.
You always create the most seller finance notes for as long as we've been tracking it. And that doesn't surprise you, does it, Eddie?
No, it's. I was going to say back in the old days when you guys were on the executive team at Metropolitan, 20 or 25% of all the notes you bought were in Texas, and that was 20 years ago.
Yeah, don't say old days and my name in the same sentence ever again, please.
So what's behind the decrease? We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because numbers fluctuate, right? But mostly it's attributed to existing home sales slid. And this is at the end of 2022, which are the numbers we're looking at. And we can see that across the board, previously owned U.S. homes, that fell for the 11th month in a row to the lowest since 2010. And so that decline was about 17.8% from 2021, which funny enough was pretty close to that dollar volume that we saw. That was a decrease in seller financing as well. So still lots of notes out there being created and to be bought, but we do trend along with the normal real estate cycles. We also predict, as we'll see later in this, that as these trends happen, we think there'll be more seller financing. So we think we might actually go up as overall sales go down. So there were a couple of states that had the biggest contribution to this decrease, and California was one of them. Over 30% of the decline in seller financing came from California. Other states like Texas, they held pretty steady. In fact, Texas went up a few in count over the prior year, and Florida had a little bit of a decrease. Yeah. So overall, you can just see that one state had a lot of contribution towards that.
Yeah. I mean, if you take California and Texas alone, you've got 35% and 25%. So,
Texas didn't have the makeup of the whole number. You're right. Yeah. I see what you're saying. That makes sense.
I was wondering, any insight into why you think possibly California slid so much?
No. I mean, we can speculate it on overall. I mean, California is always one of those ones that, as note buyers, we're surprised there's as many notes in it. Like they create as many because it's not a state we all talk about as much. I think there's probably just between they're just kind of one of the first ones to get hit on interest rate increase, on exodus that has been going on a lot lately. I mean, I don't know. That's a good question. Especially when you look at California sliding and Texas actually holding its own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think you're probably on it, Fred. I think price band is an issue, and California's been hit pretty hard economically, and by declining real estate values. So, a lot of things. I'm out in California a lot, but not necessarily always on the coast. I mean, I just spent a week in California in the mountains on a trail ride. Right. And people forget how rural California is too. Right. But it's that's a big decrease for them. So great data and great research to figure that out.
Yeah. Then we look at this next chart. This is seller financing usage by count since 2009. So that would be since we're keeping these graphs. And so you can see what happened there in 2012, 13, 14, 15, it went up quite a bit. And that was during the subprime meltdown after that, when financing was really hard to get. And then we see it sort of leveled out for the last few years.
Yeah, we're going to talk about this in a little bit as far as how that, 12, 13, 14 could be, recreation right now because of interest rates out. Also, one thing to note on this is that we're talking seller finance first positions or routes. We're talking the loan balance has to be over 30,000. These are not second mortgages, which you see a lot of, 80, 10, 10s and stuff like that. This does not include any of those.
And it doesn't include any contract for deeds that aren't recorded. It wouldn't
Yeah.
include subject twos or options or lease options. So these are truly either recorded contract for deeds, recorded deeds with deeds of trust, or recorded deeds with mortgages where the seller took back financing. So the pool is actually larger than this. It doesn't include business notes or any of those types of financing either.
That's great.
So we're going to break down by property type. We just want to focus in on how we got to 123 billion in the past 5 years. And you can see in 2018 is about 25.9 billion, and 23.9 in 2019, 23.5 in 2020, 27.3 in 2021. So you can see the 22.5 was a bit down in volume, but it's not way off what it has been in prior years. Now, what's really interesting here is how that breaks down by property type.
Yeah, so the first category is kind of the biggest category, and that's residential. And that's what we all pretty much know for the most part and see a lot of where you're driving by and for sale by owner, owner will finance. This is just a residential house, single family residence. It could be owner occupied. It could be somebody that bought it to have renters in it, but it is a residential house. And that's roughly 52.8% of the dollars at 63% of the transactions. And again, we're talking 2022.
And last year, there were about 5.8 billion commercial deals that were seller financed. That's about 25% of the dollar volume and about 16% of the count.
Yep. The next one's land, which is basically 3.5 billion. So it's about 15.7% of the overall dollar volume and 17% of the transaction number. And then a catch-all category.
Yeah, I hate this catch-all category, but it gets smaller every year, but that's the unknown. And that just means that we could not tell from the county records what the property type was. And that's because different counties have different amounts of data available. So we're happy that that unknown number is down so small.
And that number used to be higher as more counties start reporting or we're able to get it. It's safe to break apart. We kind of think that the good rule of thumb on that is to break it apart by the similar percentage you already see in the other three. And that's probably going to be about where it falls.
So this talks about how much down payment do you think the average seller finance deal has? So loan to value is how much the note amount is compared to the value of the property, which is the sales price for this statistic. And this is not all states recording sales price. So this is calculated from the states that do disclose sales price. But you might be surprised that on residential last year for 2022, 75% loan to value, which means most of them put 25% down on residential transactions. That's a big number. That's not all zero down deals, right?
That proves a stat that we kind of think differently, but it just proves a number. There, people that buy with seller financing have a lot of money.
Yeah, we have that stigma that I think people, when they first hear about the industry, go, oh, you're dealing with poor credit people with no money down and things like that. And that's not what the numbers reflect. That's not the average. I mean, sure, certainly there are people that have credit issues and certainly there are people that have lower down payments, but that is not statistically what's normally happening.
Yeah.
The other average here, the average seller finance size of note on residential last year was 225,857. And that was about a 16% decrease from 2021. It was a little higher in 2021. So now we break this down also by the other property categories.
Yeah. So the next property is commercial. So commercial was at 66 LTV. So again, very large down payments. The average commercial transaction, 432,000. Again, another decrease, 13% decrease. And I think this is really just due to the market shifting. The average prices start to, coming off the highs, coming off the mad frenzy that was through COVID on acquisition. But you can see that it's down a little bit from 2021, which isn't surprising, and a 13% decrease, like I said, but a big down payment.
And then we've got land. It had a 68% loan to value. Last year it was the year prior, 2021, it was 70%. So bigger down payments on land. Land average transaction side was 247, 735. And that was actually a little bit of an increase, 6% increase in the average dollar amount of notes that were seller financed in 2021. So, it used to be the residential note size was quite a bit smaller. We used to see it more in the 150 to 180. And then when the values went up the last 3 or 4 years, we started seeing the average note size go up as well. I'm sure you've seen that as well in your inventory, Eddie.
For sure. And, we have our eyes really focused right now on commercial. Commercial loan to values, if you looked at it year over year. So last June, loan to values were 75 and 80%. Right now, the loan to values are about 50 and 55%. Those are commercial loans that are being offered by commercial lenders. Mm-hmm. So very dramatic numbers that we see a tightening of underwriting. And I think those loan to values kind of quickly reflect that. So we think seller financing could be a big jump in the commercial space for those reasons.
Yeah, it's a good thing to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Now we come back to the state comparison. So we've got 68% of the volume by count was from the top 10 producing states. And the other 32% were the remaining 40 states. So everybody wants to know, well, what were the top states? So
we kind of gave it away a little bit earlier, but number 1 is Texas. Number 2 is Florida. California is number 3. Then it's, I think, North Carolina, Georgia in that order. Those are the top 5 states. And if we throw in and go all the way to the top 10 states, that's where we can get some of the other ones. There's always a little bit of movement around the mid-tier, especially when, between 5 and 10. Texas is always number 1. Florida and California run real close to each other. But a lot, and obviously we have all the states.
Yeah, and people might also be surprised just to see like New York, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Washington, Oregon, and they're rounding out the top 10. Tennessee, I think, was in the top 10 last year. And I think it was Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Pennsylvania is the one I think that jumped up
a little bit from the 11 to 20 top category. So there's still a lot of notes created in other states. There's some states that have very few seller finance notes, like North Dakota and South Dakota. But this lineup looks very similar, at least the top 20 from year to year. And if somebody wants to know how their state ranked, we do make that downloadable at our website at noteinvestor.com/stats. So you can just kind of see how your state ranks up. But you can see when you get down to South Dakota, there's just not a lot of seller finance deals anymore.
Does that say 11?
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't have all their counties.
A lot of their, yeah. So remember, that comes down to what counties record that we can get a hold, or report the recording electronically. So
yes, a lot of those rural counties aren't online for their stats, and those would be the ones that we can.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. South Dakota's not all of a sudden going to have 7,000 if we're able to actually get a hold of the data. Yeah. It's not going to jump up dramatically, but there's definitely more than 11. I'm sure that have happened there. This is my type of note creator. We talked about this in the beginning, and I love this category because this is something we've always wondered as far as who creates just a one-off note where maybe they retired, moved down south, and they sold their one property, and who's kind of in the business of creating notes, or at least is in a situation where they end up creating more than one note. So they could be selling off lots of land they own, or maybe they own several homes and now they're starting to sell them off. So what we found here in 2020 was 85% of the notes created were people that had one note in 12 months. So that was the bulk of it. That's we call them the mom and pop sellers. They're just, by situation that they just have one note and they sell it and they move on. But
yeah, there's 15%. So the other 15% created 2 or more notes. So if you break that down a little bit further, you see out of that 15%, 8% of the whole created 2 to 3 notes in the last 12 months, and 7% of the whole created 4 or more notes. And those two combined equal that 15%. So there are a certain number of people out there that are creating notes on a regular basis.
Yeah, the professional seller, we call them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And we work differently with professional sellers than we do with mom and pop sellers. And Fortunately, professional sellers do usually a more thorough job of making sure that buyer borrower has the ability to repay and documenting the file. Whereas somebody is just doing 1 in 12 months, they may not know all that information or that they even should ask it. So the quality of paper usually is different between the two, but it's interesting. Some people are very surprised by this. I've had a lot of people come back and say, oh, I thought it would have been the other way around. 85% are getting created by people who do it in the business. I didn't realize that there were just one-off people doing it. And this really does have to do a lot with, is the property or the buyer hard to finance? Is it harder to get finance in that area? So all of those reasons might contribute why mom and pop would carry back a note.
It's a great point.
And that looks a lot like it has in the prior years. So this isn't a one-off anomaly. We can see that in 2021, about 16% were from the professional sellers, 19% in 2020, 13% in 2019, and 18% in 2018. So that's fairly consistent overall.
A lot more mom and pop seller financing than we think.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, agreed. That's what I hope everybody walks away from this session with.
So let's talk about 2023. What's happening this year, and it's a little bit easier when you're already 5 months into it to make those predictions. But inflation and interest rates. It's getting, interest rates are going up, obviously, and everybody knows that, and it's also getting harder to get some of those loans. And now we have a potential kind of back burner banking crisis on top of that. So all of those things, when anytime money is harder to get, it equals more notes being created. And we talked about that bar graph earlier, where we saw it after the meltdown, more and more notes being created. We're kind of looking very, very similar at that situation.
Yeah, and during all this time, we have the low real estate inventory. Some markets are softening on price, some aren't. It's very regional. So what might be happening in your market might be different than another market, as we noticed in what happened in California versus Texas for seller financing. So you really have to keep an eye on it regionally. But when we look at the market from a big picture, we think it's harder to get financed. And we don't just think that. The Mortgage Credit Availability Index that's released by the Mortgage Bankers Association every month shows the same thing. So we can see that it was the higher the number, the easier it is to get a loan to buy a home. So when the number was up at 185 during that 2017 to 2019, it was pretty easy to get a home loan to buy a house. But then we saw COVID hit and all the lenders started to tighten up a little bit. They weren't sure what was going to happen. And that's where you see that big drop in 2020. Then it came back a little bit as things eased on the lending side. And then when the interest rates went up, boom, we can see that down that availability of credit went again. So now we're tracking in the mortgage credit availability. It's harder to get financed for people. We're tracking close to what we were after the 2008 to 2010 subprime mortgage meltdown. And when you put those two charts together, you can see the correlation between when it's hard to get credit, there's more seller financing. Now we lag behind a little bit. We lag behind a year or two, but that's one of the reasons we feel like seller financing could potentially increase in the next year or two.
Well, if you think about it, we had the crash that really started in 2008. Mm-hmm. We were fully engaged by 1st of 2010. But it was really, it started peaking up in 11 on up. And so there's a lag in it. And I think you're right. I think the mix of seller financing could look very different because of this commercial situation, which is, I think, going to be a lot more dramatic than residential. This is a great report, guys. This is great.
We're glad you like it. If anybody wants a copy of it, we do make the PDF available on our website. And we have to thank our data provider, Advanced Seller Data Services, as well, for pulling all this data. And then we put it together and crunch it and analyze it and put it together in a nice slide presentation that we can all digest.
This is the best data presentation about seller financing in the market. I will assure you, every year I'm so excited. In fact, when I first saw this, as you guys know, I'm very excited because our seller finance coalition bill has dropped and really trying to get Dodd-Frank changed. And with your permission, we're going to use some of this data to present to lawmakers so they really can see a picture of it, because they don't really know, they don't have any information. And so this is just such a beautiful picture and helps us do it, and helps us all get a clarity of the business and where it's at and what it looks like. So man, 2 thumbs up. Great job.
Thank you, Eddie. We always enjoy that. And I know we've all been pushing hard for that and how we can help with the Seller Finance Coalition. We really believe in seller financing, and we also really believe it should be done right, because it can give deserving people an opportunity to own their own home that a bank might not lend to, especially in that lower price bandwidth, as you always talk about, that the banks don't like to lend on. And so if we can do that right, make sure people have the ability to repay and document it well, then we protect the buyers, we protect the sellers, and we protect the industry. And I think that Main Street really can have an impact. We need alternatives besides Wall Street and the big banks. We know what happens when we rely only on them. And so if we can all take a little bit control of our financial destiny and help other people be homeowners along the way, it's a great situation.
Nothing else to say. That's it. All right, that's a drop the mic right there.
Yeah, I got nothing after that. That's good. Yeah, we're good.
Joe, what do you think?
Well, I think that we all have been waiting, like it's Christmas when this finally pops out, and you guys put I've been thinking about it, and Eddie and I have been talking about it, and Bob Repass and on our Colonial side has been talking about it. So yeah, we're very happy. And on the same note, as far as people, some of our lawmakers not being aware, Attorney Jeff Watson told me a story a couple of years ago that he was sitting in I can't remember if it was a congressman's office in DC on a trip there. And he says, we're sitting there, and he says, I'm talking, and all their staffers were there, and they were really all into it. And, Jeff was saying, well, in seller financing, there's a lot of, and he said the congressman who wasn't really paying attention popped up when Jeff said about seller financing, and he said, the congressman looked at him and said, people really don't do that. And he said, I knew that we had kind of a still struggle uphill with
right, yeah.
at that point, but a lot of exciting things going on right now in that part of the world. So we're so happy that you guys do this.
Well, I want to give a shout out to Congressman Andy Barr, who's chairman of the Financial Services Committee. And was in our office a couple of weeks ago. And I told him, I said, he was talking about, being able to communicate with other lawmakers and get more support on the bill. And I told him, I said, I believe we're very close to having the data. There's always this lag, but I said, this port will be very comprehensive and kind of painting a picture. And so he was excited that this would be something that they could look at. So it just makes all of us, when we know where the market's going and we have clarity to what the variables are, then we make good decisions. This helps us make good decisions.
It really does. And you can be on any side of the equation, right? You could be the buyer who wants to buy property with owner financing. Mm-hmm. You can be the seller who wants to sell with owner financing because you are tired maybe of being a landlord and you'd like to cash in on the appreciation and you'd like to create a cash flow that you didn't have the hassles of tenants and termites and taxes and all the T's. And so you could create this note with seller financing and you have homeowners in there taking care of all that. Now you have a nice cash flow with a good return. Sometimes the returns are better than the cap rates, right? That you get on real estate. Or you can be us. You can be the note investor. You can go out and buy the note and help create a secondary market for this. So you can participate in many ways, and just knowing the data helps you figure out, where might I fit in on that?
No doubt. Fred and Tracy, congratulations. Great job. Beautiful information. So respect you guys for all that you've done for a long time in the industry and still being tremendous go-givers. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having us on. Same back to you guys.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So, just for those of you that maybe not know this, but Tracy and Fred have been in the industry for a long time. And you heard Tracy say since basically 1988. And they're movers and shakers in this industry. And we so respect these guys. And if you want those stats, again, make sure and go to, we'll put that address in the bar there, but make sure and go and grab it, right? And please, 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 please share this with your friends, your associates, other people you know in the business. Share this episode so that they can see what's going on in the seller finance space and why it is such a big deal. Again, if you want to know more about what we do at Note School, noteschool.com/TV. We'd love to have you in one of our 2-hour master classes here real soon. And hey, you can't beat the price, guys. We do that to give back as far as what's going on, finding out more, and there is no charge to come to one of our master classes. So make sure to check in with you. We would love to have a conversation with you guys. That is it. Next week, we have our monthly update. So stay tuned for that next Wednesday at 11:05. We will see you then. Have a great rest of your week.